Welcome, and we'll start, of course, with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Here we are, right here. Vayhi bayamim hahem, and it was so in those days. Vayigdal Moshe, Moses grew. Vayetze elechav, and he went out to his brothers. Vayar besivlotam, and he saw their heavy labors. Vayar ish mitzri, and he saw an Egyptian man. Makeh ish ivri me'echav, he saw him beating a Hebrew man of his brothers, from his brothers. So we'll take a look at the Rashi here. Vayigdal Moshe. So it says Moses grew big, right? V'halok kvar kativ vayigdal hayeled, but we already saw here back in verse 10. It says vayigdal hayeled. It says the child grew up. So what are we talking about? Amar Rabbi Yehuda beRebbi Eli. Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rabbi Eli, said, Harishon lekoma, the first time it speaks about him growing up has to do with his height. Vasheni ligdula, and the second has to do with his importance, his power. Sheminehu paro al beitohu, in that Pharaoh appointed him over his household. Vayar besivlotam, he saw their labors. This is from Bereshit Rabbah. Natan elav velibo, and he, basically it's saying he placed his eyes and his heart, liyot meyatzer alehem, to be concerned about them. It's more than just simply concerned, but to be upset about them. By the way, notice the word meitzar, which basically has to do with being in straits, and mitzrayim, which also has to do with being a narrow place. That seems to be the connotation of this land called Egypt, and possibly because whatever arable land was around had to be close to the Nile. That's a possibility. There's also a deeper meaning that has to do with the idea of Mitzrayim representing this life that is constrained between birth and death. That in a way it's a metaphor for that as well. So Ish Mitzri, he saw this Egyptian man, and this is in Shmot Rabbah. Noges Haya, he was a taskmaster. Memuneh al Shotrei Yisrael, he had been appointed over the officers, the Israelite officers. So essentially, the way this worked was that they would appoint officers from the Israelites who were in charge of making sure that they were tasked with making sure that the work was done, and then over them were these Nogsim, these Egyptian taskmasters who would enforce that the work got done on the part of the Shotrim. So he was one of the Israelite officers. Midam Mikarot Hagaver, Israel. V'haya ma'midam mikrot hagaver, and this particular taskmaster would get them up from cock crow, is what that means. In other words, daybreak. Lemilachtam, to go to their labors. Makeh ish ivri, he was beating this Hebrew man. Malkehu verodehu. He would beat him, and rodeh is to sort of enforce, to control, that kind of thing. That's what rodeh means. Uva'ala shel Shlomit bat Divri haya. This particular officer was the husband of Shelomit bat Dibri. She is going to be mentioned later on in the text. V'natan einav ba, and he cast this Noges, cast his eyes upon her. Uvalayla, and at night, He'emido, he got this man up, V'hotzio mi beito, and he forced him out of his house. V'hu chazar, and he went back, V'nichnas labayit, and this is talking about the Noges here, and he went into the house. Oh, sorry, this is still talking about the Ova al Ishto. Um, so, and he had relations with this man's wife, Kisvura Shehu Ba'ala, because she thought in the darkness that he was her husband. V'chazar Ha'ish, and this Israelite man returned Leveto to his home. V'hirgish badavar, and he sensed that this had happened. Ukeshara'a oto mitzri shehirgish badavar. Um, let's see. I want to make sure. Oh yeah. V'keshira'a oto mitzri. And when that Egyptian saw that the Israelite man suspected him, Hayam Makehu, he started to beat him, Verodehu Kol Hayom, and he forced him to work. He had mastery over him the entire day. So Rashi is giving us, bringing to light some midrashic background on this particular story of what was going on, and of course bringing out how awful the situation was. So back into the story. Vayifen ko vacho. So this is Moses, looked here and there. Vayar ki ein ish. And he saw that there was no man around. He saw there was no man. Vayach et hamitzri. And he beat the Egyptian. Vayat minehu bachol. And he buried him in the sand. Vayifen kol vachol. So what are we talking about? That he was looking around, all around here and there. Ra'a ma'asa lo babayit. He saw what he had done to him in the house. Uma asalo basadeh, and what he was doing to him in the open field. In other words, of course, how he had treated this man, how the Egyptian had treated this Israelite uh, in his private area, in his home, and what he was doing to him out there in the field, in laboring. Ulefi pshuto kamashma'o. But according to the simple meaning of the text, it just means what it means. In other words, he didn't see anyone around. Vayar ki ein ish. He saw that there wasn't a man. And the word ish sometimes has the connotation of nobility. So Rashi pulls this out. She'ein ish atid latzet mimenu sheyitkayer. That there was no person who was going to come from him, right? Descend from him, who would in fact become Jewish, who would become an Israelite, who would convert. So just giving us quite a bit of background to this very terse story here. So that's one incident. Vayetze b'yom hasheni, and then he went out, this is Moses now, went out on the next day, on the second day, vehine shnei anashim ivrim nitzim, and he saw that there were two Hebrew men contending with each other, fighting each other. Vayomer larasha, and Moses said to the wicked one, Lama takeh re'echa, why are you beating your neighbor, or your friend even, your companion? Background, Shnei anashim ivrim, two Hebrew men. And Rashi gives us the tradition that these two men were in fact Datan and Abiram. Datan and Abiram are mentioned later on in the story of Korach, right? Haim, Shehotiru min Haman. And there's also another tradition regarding these people that are named, that Hotiru min Haman, just to give you a background there, here we're talking about the manna, and the Israelites were told that God was going to give them this heavenly bread, and that they were going to collect every morning, every weekday morning, except on Shabbat. That is to say, so they would collect it every day, except on Shabbos, and on Friday they would collect a double portion, which would last over to Saturday. However, the idea was that they were to only collect an omer's worth of manna each day. That would be enough for to supply them, and they weren't to have leftovers. They were to have enough faith in God that God would provide them the next day's ration. And Datan and Aviram didn't pay attention, and they left over. They saved some of manna for the next day. They did not have enough faith in God to trust that God, after having brought them the manna to begin with, was going to bring it to them the next day as well. So there's a general stylistic, you might call it, tradition that when it talks about wicked people, it limits it, that the tradition to understand it is to limit it to people who are actually identified as wicked. And that's exactly what we're doing here, is saying these are all the same people. That essentially that when the Torah is talking about people who are wicked, that unless we have no other alternative, we're always going to be talking about the same people. Nitzim, Rashi just explains the Hebrew here, Merivim. They were contending, they were fighting each other. And remember, Moses said to the wicked one, Lama takeh, why are you beating? And Rashi explains that Afal Pi Shelo Hikahu, that at this point he hadn't beaten him yet. He hadn't actually laid his hand on him. Nikra Rasha, he's already considered a wicked person, Bahara Matyad, in that he was lifting his hand to strike his fellow. And even though he hadn't actually touched him, the act of lifting his hand, getting ready to strike, already determined what kind of personality he had, and that he was a wicked person. So then he says, Re'echa, uses the word Re'echa, which means your fellow, right? And Rashi again interprets Rasha Kamocha. He says, he's as wicked as you are. In other words, why are the two of you behaving like this? But he was addressing the one who had actually raised his hand against the other. Vayomer, and now we have an example of a little bit of biblical sarcasm. And this person said to him, Mi samcha le'ish, sar v'shofet aleinu. Who appointed you as a man who was going to be our ruler and our judge over us? So here we have this sarcastic response. Halahargeni ata omer, are you planning on killing me? Ka'asher haragta et hamitzri, just as you killed the Egyptian? Lovely response. So just to finish this off, Vayira Moshe, and Moses became afraid. Vayomer, and again, here we have this word amar, which seems to suggest think and not just said, right? And he thought, Achain, indeed, noda hadavar, this matter is known. They found out about it, what I did before. So just some interesting literary uh, irony going on here in this story, right? Moses, it says already that the reason why Moses acted to begin with was out of concern and compassion for the Hebrews, and at the same time, he gets himself into trouble for that. Now, I mean, is there an issue of the fact that he acted precipitously in the first case? I'm not sure. I don't, I think this story has quite a bit to unpack as far as what's going on um, in terms of how things have to develop from this point on, um, whether or not the Israelite who was being beaten to begin with was Datan or Abiram. They're not identified, and obviously, at least in the commentary here, it's not suggesting that he was the one who then turned to Moses. At least in this commentary, it's suggesting that he was not a wicked person, that original Israelite. But however, just that word got around, and this is such a great example of the statement that you've heard me make so many times, ain't no one gonna tell me what to do. Nothing new about that human attitude.
Uh,
Uh,
I
yes,
noticed something that I never really noticed before.
yes,
Moses knew exactly who he was,
yes,
and everybody knew exactly who Moses was. So it
yes.
was like no surprise, like they do in when they in in the Ten Commandments, or movies like that, or something like,
Hmm.
oh, I didn't know, and it's like because and I'm going to be second to the Pharaoh and all this stuff. No, he was never going to be second to Pharaoh. It was never going to happen. But
Right, right.
right.
But
So
but
he
the,
already knew where his place was. So when he went out to observe, he knew that he'd been trained to do stuff, to be a leader, but these were the people he could be a leader for
right.
and
I
he
mean,
could take care of.
so I think that he certainly, remember, he was nursed by his own mother. One doesn't get the feeling that Pharaoh's daughter, even though it says that he became a son to her, that she necessarily hid from him his origins between his mother and Pharaoh's daughter. That's one thing. On the one hand, of course, I'm troubled a little bit by the fact that he felt that he had the authority to kill the Egyptian. On the other hand, I think we have to understand that there are places, of course, to this very day. I'll never forget, I think this happened in North Korea, where the dictator was speaking to the group, and this one soldier fell asleep, and basically he was killed. That was considered insubordination to the extent that it was a capital offense. So that the kind of power that people had back in those days, certainly in these societies, given the fact that Moses grew up in Pharaoh's court, that possibly he knew, but on the other hand, the fact that he looked around, so that would suggest that he felt that doing that was the wrong thing to do. If he was looking to make sure no one else was going to see what he did, I mean, that particular little story has some
Mhm.
ambiguities to it. It is an interesting story, but on the other hand, it certainly, suggests the degree of compassion that Moses had for the Israelites. But it still has some troubling elements to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going on now on the second story here. Let's see. Okay. This Israelite speaks to him in this sarcastic way. Here we go. Mi simcha la'ish. So Rashi's looking at this fact that he says, "Who made you a man?" Right? V'harei odcha na'ar, and the implication is you're still a young man. You're still a youth. Right? So who who gave you complete authority as a man? You're still a minor of some kind anyway. Halahargeni ata omer. Are you are you suggesting that you are going to kill me? And it says ata omer. So Rashi again is looking at the choice of Hebrew words. So to kill me, are you saying, right? Are you saying? Mikan anu lemedim. From this we can learn shehargo b'shem hamaforash, that when Moses killed the Egyptian, he used the divine name. That's how he killed him. He used the divine name. That again, this stuff has a lot behind it, right? Is it so obviously the first suggestion is that he didn't use physical force to kill this particular person. Is he suggesting that you know since there's the divine name involved, that this was a divine, a divine application of justice, of divine justice, and that somehow there was a way to connect there. Again, I'm not trying to totally understand what's going on here, but I'm just trying to open up some thoughts as to why these comments are being shared with us. Vayar Moshe, and it says Moses was afraid. Kipshuto. And Rashi says it's just the way it comes across. He was afraid. Umidrasho, however, there is a midrash. Da'ag lo, he was concerned about him. Al shera'a Yisrael rishaim. In that, and so Moses was concerned himself. That's how I think I would want to translate that. In that he saw amongst the Israelites rishaim dilitorin. He saw there had to be amongst the Israelites wicked people who were informers. In other words, someone must have informed the authorities about what he had done before. Amar, and not just that, but again, he thought to himself, Me'ata, from this, Shema Einam Re'uyim. It's possible, perhaps, Shema, perhaps, Einam Re'uyim. They are not worthy, uh, Lehigael, to be redeemed. So when it says he was afraid, okay, Rashi is suggesting that the Midrash is telling us that it wasn't that he was so afraid of himself and for himself, but he was afraid on account of the Israelites and their own wickedness that was being manifest to him at this point, and wondering whether they would even deserve to be redeemed. And we'll finish this up. Achen noda hadavar. Indeed, this matter is known. And again, Rashi said, just the way it suggests. Umidrasho. However, there's a midrash on this. Noda li hadavar. Okay. Now I know the matter. Shayiti tameh alav. That because I was wondering, I was puzzled, right? Ma chat'u Yisrael mikol shiv'im umot. Okay, what was the sin that the Israelites had sinned with compared to the other 70 nations? Liyot nirdim be'avodat parech, that they should be ruled with this or governed with this heavy labor. Aval ro'eh ani, however, I see shehem ru'uyim lachach, that in fact they deserve this. This is so again pushing the simple meaning along other lines, that Moses came to a realization that in fact the Israelites, what had happened to the Israelites was divinely justified. That's what this midrash is suggesting. So, and with this, we'll stop today's session, and I will take this. Let's go back here, and I'm going to remove that, and we'll have it for, with God's will, next year. So here we are. Let's in. See, I'm trying to see where if I have that. Okay, we'll put this in here. For next year. And I'm going to set a bookmark into this page. And I'm going to stop the share, and we'll stop the recording and thank those who are watching.